Michael, thanks for coming.
Thank you, Rabbi Taragin.
Welcome home.
Thank you.
Erev Shavuot is the place that shaped our lives and that shaped our Kabbalah Torah throughout so many years. Pesach is a static event. It took place thousands of years ago. We relive it. It's the power of the Jewish imagination. But it's an event. No one's leaving Egypt in Tafshin Pei in Israel. But Vav Sivan, it's more dynamic. We renew our attitudes to Torah. We rethink our Kabbalah Torah. It's a refreshed experience. Our relationship with Torah, our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's not historical, it's existential. So Talmud Torah and Kabbalah Torah in 2021 should be very different than it was in 1821 and very different than it was in 1421. Here a person has a clear, sharp sense of where the world's heading, where it's landing, some of the trends, cultural trends that inevitably affect us. We believe the wisdoms of Torah provide answers, relevancies for all the twists and pivots and shifts in our society. What is Kabbalah Torah 2021, modern world, post-corona world? A lot happening in our world.
Yeah.
What does it mean to you?
Somewhat controversially, potentially I'll add that there's a machlokus in the Gemara as to actually when did Matan Torah happen. We actually don't have a firm date for Matan Torah, and I think actually that's beautiful, meaning it's not anchored in a date or in a historical event. It is pervasive, and yeah, the amorphousness of it actually adds to the existential importance of it. We're living in turbulent times. I don't know if they're more turbulent than they were in the past because I didn't live in the past, but many things seem to be fluid. Values seem to be fluid. Technology is challenging all of us to answer new questions about everything from biology to artificial intelligence to what we think of ourselves and our own identities. And in those turbulent times, we need anchors. And anchors go back to first principles, and I can think of nothing that's more first principles in the Torah. I've written a few of my books, and I say all the time, everybody talks about number of users, right? How many unique users do you have? How many unique people will see this video? The book with the biggest number of unique users in the history of mankind is the Torah, is the Tanakh. And so we ought to pay attention to those first principles in it. What does it mean for you? I live in the outside world. You spend most of your life in the Beis Medrash, where I like to get back to.
I wasn't in the Beis Medrash this year. The Beis Medrash was cordoned off. And the time I was in the Beis Medrash was a very, very scaled-down Beis Medrash. And it made me think about communities, and communities that lend our lives dignity. And there's a selfishness and an egocentrism in living life as an individual. And the communities we build and the confidence we set with those communities and the commitments we make to those communities, even if personal sacrifice, is what lends our life dignity and meaning and purpose. And as those communities started to shrink, it gave me an opportunity to reinforce in my mind. I think we live in a world of shrinking communal identity. And some of the hyper-pluralism, hyper-liberalism, it's politically incorrect to identify human beings today as belonging. And when we don't belong, we shrink into a very small space of self. And there's a community of people that I think about on Shavuot. And perhaps maybe since my actual community shrunk, and I think a lot of people across the world are going to reimagine Jewish communal life through the prism of what their shuls are meant to serve. And I hope that at the end of that tunnel, there'll be some reinvention, because life is always about reinventing and re-pivoting and repostulating. But I hope that there'll be a reinforcement of belonging, to Har Sinai. Har Sinai is a day of theology, of cosmology, of angels, of fire. But in Sefer Dvarim, it's called Yom HaKal. It's the day of gathering, it's the day of assembly. I was thinking a lot about this 2 weeks ago after the Meron disaster. And for a lot of people who aren't Kabbalistic, the optics just didn't make sense to them. And obviously we identify with people at a human level and their suffering, but thronging together, gathering together in the Beis HaMikdash. Yesterday, Yom Yerushalayim at the Kotel, gathering. It's a modern event. You can't imagine an exile Jews gathering in more than 50, 60,000 max, and now we're gathering 200, 300. Fortunately, infrastructure didn't support it, but I hope we'll be able to gather once again in larger sections. So, ironically, I'm thinking a lot about people, but a lot of people, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I wrote a blog post pre-corona that my investment philosophy for the 21st century is humanity first. I think a lot of people, and I invest in technology for a living, it's what I do. A lot of people went the other way, kind of more digital. But I actually think the more digital you go, the more anchors on a human level we need. And this notion of hugging and touching, which we missed so much during Corona, is, I think, fundamental not just to Torah lives and not just to communal lives, but also to an investment philosophy that I think is a good investment philosophy. And I think one of the interesting things about what you called Yom HaKahal and the Torah is it created an event and then a book, a timeless text that you can point back to and relate to. So everybody has the same starting point. Yes, it may have diverged here, it may have diverged there, etc. But if you can kind of come back, and it doesn't matter what your interpretation is, but you're at least arguing or discussing the same topic, that matters. And in this world of increasing digitization, and therefore perhaps more screens and filters on people, I think it's super important, imperative, useful to go back to discussing, arguing, agreeing, interpreting the same set of texts.
Very often the great disputes are people just have completely different frames of references. They're missing each other. Two ships in the night, they're not even speaking to one another.
Yeah.
The common ground. But tell me something. You said I'm in the base matters, so my days are spent in an eternal, majestic world of Jewish texts, of Ritvas and Rashbas and Tosfos, speaking to the next generation, hopefully of Jewish leaders and Jewish scholars. You spend a little bit, your world's a little bit different. What about our Torah strikes humanity in 2021? They've met you, they've heard from you. You know, that really changed my life when they hear about your lifestyle and about Torah, because we believe that we are a universal and international people, and it is a local event and a parochial event that's meant to radiate light for the entire planet. So how have you been exposed to that?
It's hard to speak personally about the topic. What I can tell you is that religion in general, I think Judaism and Jewish texts in particular, is having a moment. You can see it. The number of books published about Jewish texts to the common audience, to a broader audience, is increasing. The number of books about religion you see is becoming more.
Judaism, religion in general.
Both, yeah, both. You see Catholics speaking up more, Muslims, and certainly Jews speaking up more. And I'd argue, and I have a friend, his name is Balaji Srivanasan, who's Indian, lives in Singapore now, who basically argues that the core trends of the coming centuries are increased distributed digitization and increased focus of religion. And I think those two trends, even though they look opposite, are actually supplemental and complementary. And so, you know, in my daily life, I try to anchor it. Starts with Torah in the morning because it needs to permeate the day. And this notion of both faith and community that you eloquently discussed is critically important as the world becomes more diffuse and distributed. And that's where we're headed. And so I think we need to strengthen these two pillars in our own communities, which is the focus on technology and digitization, and even more so, the focus on ongoing Kabbalas HaTorah that enables us to inform these fast-moving events.
The great bonds of religion. The timeless bonds of religion.
The timeless bonds of religion, the timeless values of religion. So we went through a national and international. It's still going on. I mean, people think that COVID is over because Israel's back to normal, but there are people dying in India. What are some of your Torah-inspired thoughts about Klal Yisrael as a unit, and then the broader world? How has that been influenced through Corona and post-Corona, to the extent we're not there yet, at least in my view?
It's a good question. I think there really are two questions. One question is, we are a special nation. We are chosen. We're chosen for leadership. We're chosen for example. We're priests. We're meant to showcase a more refined religious life so that people will be inspired towards morality, monotheism, higher ground. That's why we're sometimes disdained, because we're whistleblowers. We're the consummate whistleblowers. And this is not a very Jewish experience. I'd hope at certain points that we be the exemplars for the world. The beginning, the initial stages we were, and then our erratic behavior and our uneven adherence to the guidelines, I think, torpedo some of that potential. I think that our exiting Corona a little bit sooner than other nations has given us an international stage. But I am struggling. I think this was a reminder. I think this was a wake-up call. I think over the last 50, 60 years, post-Holocaust, building the State of Israel, reinforcing Torah, we've become very parochial, very internally focused, as we should have been. I think someone like Rabbi Sachs, Zichrono Livracha, reminded us of our universal message and of the universal duty. And I think that Corona we stood shoulder to shoulder with citizens of the world, no difference between Jew and non-Jew. And not only were we similarly affected, but there's no way to pull out of this epidemic without common partnership and collaboration. So it certainly was a year of rethinking that balance between pluralism and universalism. I think also that every Jew lives a bifurcated life. You live your current reality, and you embrace that reality. Jews aren't escapists. We don't look for nirvana. We're not looking to flee the challenges of this world. There's a part of us that's apocalyptic, that realizes there's a different world we will one day inhabit, whether it's a different realm or a different part of history. And the more that the world around us works, the harder it is to envision those other worlds. The more dysfunctional the world around us seems, I think the more in touch we are with those other realities. And I think that those eternities were a little bit clearer in a world which seemed just a little bit less cooperative. So those were the two parts of my life. Those were the two calibrations that were readjusted. But what about you?
I can't get over the brilliance of Chazal in setting up that Parshas Bechukosai needs to become before Shavuos, that you need the Tochacha. And you read through the Tochacha, and we read about Magefot, about viruses and pestilence, etc. And we also read about that in Bechukosai Telechu, and the Abarbanel asks this very famously, okay, why is the reward material? To your point of, we're not escapists. You'd think that it should be something eschatological. It's not. It's a very it's very, very earthly. And I think that viruses, pandemics as the case may be, more than impacting, expose what's actually going on under the surface. By forcing people to focus on survival rather than other topics, it exposes what is at the heart of your culture, what is at the heart of your value system. And after that virus in Parshas Bechukosai, which exposes flaws, both internally and those that are responsible for other nations of the world and other people, and setting an example, comes Kabbalas Torah in a renewed sense, because of the flaws, the values that have been eroded. I think it's Shadal of Hirsch, I can't remember, says that the Tochav Bechukosai is on two mitzvahs. What's in Bechukosai Terecho? Just on Shemitah and Yovel. Shemitah and Yovel. Yovel is not passing on poverty generationally, and Shemitah is, let the animals and the people eat from the field. We need an economic reset. And is it every man for himself, or are we empowering others? The same Balaji has a great economic philosophy for the modern age and what he calls the cryptocurrency generation, which is win and help others win. And it asks us on Shemitah and Yovel, are we winning and helping others win, or are we fending for ourselves? And I think the virus, much like the Torah says, exposed that. And now we have an opportunity. And this Shavuos for me is super meaningful, kind of at this point. And I debated with myself what to do this Shavuos because of my injury. Am I staying up all night or not? I'm going to give too sure. But we need to reinvigorate that commitment to the basic values of the Torah. In Bechukosai Telechu, v'mitzvosai tishmo v'asisem osam, v'imlo tishmuli. And I think those are important, and it's a communal thing, and it's a national thing, and it's an international thing, and it's a Jewish community thing. How do you think about this Shavuos differently than last Shavuos? Well, the last one was really hard, but the one before that.
I was going to go back to something you said a moment ago. A couple hours ago, I had a conversation with the Talmud in Yeshiva. Yesterday, we stood at the Kotel, thousands of Hesder Yeshivas davening, singing Hallel at the top of our lungs. In the background, we heard the anti-riot measures, Mimonei Helem, or we call it stun grenades. Stun grenades. Very loud, very frightening. And he found these two experiences very jarring, very discrepant, very abrasive. We're singing, people are suffering. I'm sure there's some innocent people, and we wish everyone who has been affected, certainly the innocent people, with everyone. And he said, how do I reconcile those two experiences? And I told him, I said, we believe that our purpose in this world and our march to Jerusalem, our march through history is a human march. We're at the advanced columns of those marches, and we're marching to a better place. And we will heal the world medically and politically and economically and diplomatically and psychologically. And we need a lot of psychological healing in our world. And the world isn't yet ready to accept that. And it's a broken world. And in that broken world, there are different narratives, and the world sees those narratives as discrepant. And we certainly have to be attentive to the world's view because we're members of this world. But at my heart, I see it as one common march. And if there are people who are not yet prepared to accept the fact that we're marching for their own good because we believe that when we return to Jerusalem, the world will be in a better place. And all of humanity will sing, Haluas Hashem Kol Day and Shabchu Kol Amin. So I thought about that during the pandemic, that we want to heal the world, and for us to heal the world, we are expected to be in Yerushalayim. When Hashem determines that it's our time, we're expected to receive Hashem's Torah and lessen the world and the values of religion and community.
You know, apropos that, think about the amount of Torah that was spread due to the digitization in Corona. So there's more Torah extant in the world today. I often say that after Hodu and Hallel comes Min HaMeitzar. That's not an accident. You know, the world is full of ups and downs. But the meta trend, I think, is super positive. There are more people learning Torah in the world today. We have more Jews living in Israel today. And it's hard, particularly because of social media, and in fact, all this stuff is kind of bombarding you, to have an optimistic view of everything going on, because the most bizarre and negative person is amplified the loudest. And so it's hard. But the meta trend is positive, and it takes us back to Ma'amad Har Sinai. And one of the things that I've always struggled with is, I understand, Klal Yisrael heard from God to Dibros and said, Daber ata itanu v'nishma. Well, let's hear you, Moshe Rabbeinu. And you kind of look back and say, come on. They didn't really kind of downgrade God and say, go to Moshe Rabbeinu. Because even at amazing events, there are downs, and it's hard, and there's the Negel Azov. But the question is not just, are you up or are you down? Is things going good right now? Can I look past it? And what am I going to do to fix it? And Shavuot for me is just an eternally optimistic holiday like that. I think, by the way, that's why it's combined with the Katsir. If you think about the Katsir, so farmer plants his wheat the whole year round, and he finally gets to the harvest. Super happy day. He actually can't eat the harvest, though. There is a huge amount of work, right? We know in the Melachos of Shabbos, Dash Zor Bor Meraked, etc. In order to get to what he really wants, he doesn't want wheat. He wants bread. And so the work is actually just beginning. And it's going to be a long, hot, hard summer to go get there, ultimately, to Chag HaSukkos and other things. But it's the beginning of a positive trend. There'll be hard times along the way. It's a process. Torah is a process. Am Yisrael is a process. Eretz Yisrael is a process.
One of my favorite midrashim is the splintering of the voices. Achas Dibur Hashem Shaim Zu Shamati. Don't ask me to model it,
because you're a gushnik.
Human beings can't speak two words at once.
Yeah.
And it just demonstrates that the whole communication was divine, and it wasn't a human playing field.
How do you interpret that?
So I was actually going to stream it through our past experiences, because I look at that building and there's one Torah, but we heard two Torahs. There was the Torah of Rav Aaron Lichtenstein and the Torah of Rav Amital. So it wasn't really obviously two people, but it was one Masorah. What are the words, what are the ideas you associate, Al? I'll give you Rav Lichtenstein. Tell me, when you're thinking about Shavuot, and he was the persona, the person that brought you to Har Sinai, you don't want to say Moshe Rabbeinu, that would not be a term to apply to any other human being than Moshe, but our leader, our Masorah, a connector. What did he give you? What part of Har Sinai? Where is the base camp that he established you on that mountain?
The world is complex. That Torah is complex. And it can incorporate a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different views. And more than anything, I've said this many times before, that the letter of the law is not necessarily the most important thing. It's the Kedoshim to you. It's the Ramban's Kedoshim to you. Shalote Novel B'Rshus HaTorah. I can be right by the letter of the law, but it's immoral and unethical, and that God lives in the gray areas. I think it's not an accident that God is in the Arafat. There's a medrash that Moshe Rabbeinu was standing on the edge of the clouds to talk to Hashem. And someone asked me recently, what do I think about that medrash? I said, you're on a precipice when you approach God, because it's very gray, and there's a lot of figuring out to do in the gray areas, and that's what I learned from Rav Aaron. And you?
Well, Rav Amital. I'll take Rav Amital.
Okay.
I hear his voice in my ear. I hear this one word. It haunts me. I hear his tone. I hear his ring. I hear the way he says. Sometimes I think about the voices inside your head.
Yes, totally.
The voices inside our head. Relevantio. Just hear that word. It's a mellifluous word. It flows through my consciousness. That is not some yellow document of ancient sages It took time from herding their goats to study God's will. But now, there's a world of technology, culture, democracy, politics. If we look hard enough and we screen it properly, enough confidence in ourselves and enough wisdom, we can excavate from Torah responses to our world, and that becomes a steadying force. There's nothing to be said about Torah steadying you if you're not engaged in this world. Some people disengage from the world, and Torah becomes their only axis, and that's one form of buoyancy or one form of ground zero. But if you're engaged in this world, the world is varied, there are shifts and turns and evolutions and revolutions, but you're not frightened by it because you think you've got a code book, you've got a guide, and it's that confidence in there's a confidence of Amital radiated. Having been through so much, I would call him one of the Jews who lived through the 20th century and through whom the 20th century Jewish history lived through. I think of him a lot like a Menachem Begin figure. He was like an example or an epitome of what our people went through. And that confidence to see Torah in Hungary, and to see Torah in the concentration camps, to see Torah in the Six-Day War, and to see Torah in the Milchemet HaShachor, and steadiness and relevancy. So much more, but as we all know.
So you get new Talmidim. They come in every year. They turn over. Sometimes they stay for 2 years. Sometimes they stay for 3 years. What's different about the way you talk to Talmidim about Matan Torah and Torah in general today versus how you talked to them 10 or 20 years ago?
Good question. Good question. You're in a different place, and you want your message as a teacher. It's about teaching more than anything about Torah. You always want whatever teaching to be authentic, and for it to be authentic, it can't be too fast. It can't be microwavable. You take it out of the fridge.
And patented.
It has to be you. It has to be real, I think. Students, one said, in a way that's a bit derisive, but students are like dogs. They can smell fakes a mile away. Sefer Katani, Ratio Katani. I agree with their assessment of belief. I won't use dogs as the metaphor. But this sense of accuracy, and as you go through life, the greatest storytellers of life, or the greatest teachers are storytellers.
Yeah.
And storytellers are people that tell their story through the values that they're conveying. So as a person, I'm changing. I'm in a different stage of life. I see Torah differently, and I want my message to be. You also want that message to be adapted to the cultural changes where they are. There's so much Torah, as you said before, available. I think people have to learn to slow down. Less information, maybe more wisdom. T.S. Eliot in The Wasteland. Where's the knowledge we've lost in information, and where's the wisdom we've lost in knowledge? That was written 80 years before the internet. There's this tsunami of worthless trivia and worthless information and masquerading as wisdom. I'm not sure about the dwindling access to wisdom, to ideas, to thought, to depth. In life, I think we're becoming a little more shallow, I think. Ironically, even our study of Torah, fortunately, I think that some of it is more accessible when it isn't as demanding as Daf Yomi. And I think everyone would line up to applaud the Daf Yomi phenomena. But it is starting to bleed into other areas where I think we should be more thinking about faith, about belief, about identity, about a more panoramic Jewish identity. But how about you?
I love to think about this in an Israeli context, which is 73 years ago, the state was set up more as an asylum for people fleeing from Europe, North Africa, etc., but on a core Zionist ethos that was actually, even if it was secular, was attached to Tanakh. And I think 70 years into any country, but certainly into this country, we need to re-narrate this. We need to restudy, reapply, reinvigorate, make relevant these core Torah, Tanakh, Gemara teachings at a deep level, what it means for Israel, what it means for the Jewish people, and what it means for the world. And that you mentioned before that for some people they kind of sit in the base medrash and that's their approach to Torah. I actually don't think Torah can survive that and suffer that. I know that sounds radical, but I think the Torah requires real-world application, and particularly because so many people are being bombarded with information. And we can create an absolutely authentic, multifaceted Shtein Zu Shamati Torah experience at a deep, deep level with investigative thought and deep wisdom, and apply it to the core challenges now. And that's really Ki Mitzion Teitzei Torah in my view. And One of the things about Shavuot that always gets me is that it was given at Har Sinai, which is outside of Eretz Yisrael, but the application for real was only in Eretz Yisrael. What that tells me is that there is a timeless, endless Torah out there in the world, but it must be applied, and it must be applied for the future of the Jewish people. And again, that's why it goes back to Chag HaKatzir in my view also, which is there is the Torah at Har Sinai, dateless, and then it needs to be applied. What do I do with that Katzir? Chitim. Who do I apply it to? Is it like Boaz who goes to the Kotzrim, Hashem Yimachem, and he checks after every worker, he checks after the Almana that turned up that nobody knew who she was? It's deeply applied in that day, those deep wisdoms of the Torah that come from Leket Shechan Peah, which is what's going on in Megillat Rut. It's applied. And I think that is our challenge right now as a people, that is our challenge right now as a state, as a country, and as an ingathering of exiles, is to make it super relevant, to be a beacon of that Torah and those Torah values out, and to use it as a wisdom filter for what really matters in the world, to your point about identity and community and thoughtfulness and complexity and time-honored values.
See you at Santa.
That becomes a shidduch metaphor these days.
Yes, I saw you.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you.
Chag Sameach.
Welcome back to our mountain. We'll see you at that mountain.
Thank you.
Thank you.